Hi, everyone. My name's Dominick with Obligatory. We are here for a 411 interview with singer-songwriter Maya Lucia. Thanks for being here. How are you doing? You want to introduce yourself to anyone watching?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Lucia, and I'm currently based in New York City. I live in Brooklyn at the moment, and I'm originally from Minneapolis.
All right. That kind of leads right into one of the questions I had. Something that I find really interesting about just like talking to artists or even just listening to artists and like seeing the way they either make their music or where they go on tour, who they go on tour with. You're from Minneapolis. You spent some time in Boston. You're currently based in New York. What's kind of been your experience like with making music and just living in these different scenes, seeing how they operate, and how do you sort of tie them all together?
They're all really different. When I was in Minneapolis, that's where I grew up. So my experience of like what I knew when I first started was totally different from when I moved back for a brief stint of time. Um, I guess they kind of just have their own ways of operating. Boston, it's very underground. It's really DIY, and it's very cool by the college scene that's there, which is really cool. You get like a lot of experience. You get a lot of different sounds. You have kids from Berkeley, and you have kids that are like self-trained. So it's really really cool to like see that come together. When I moved back, I'm from Minneapolis. I went to school in Boston, and then I moved back to Minneapolis for about 7 months or so. And when I was there, it was just really interesting because it was also during the winter. I would say the DIY scene isn't super active anymore. I think there's been a lot of change just in terms of the city itself and the effect that that has had on music and on the venues. The venue scene, I would gander is a little bit more popular. You've got First Avenue, you've got 7th Street Entry, and they're all kind of, it's like the biggest venues in town pretty much operate under or are owned by First Avenue. So that kind
Hmm.
of like what the city, how I see the city is kind of like pulled musically through that. There's definitely like a distinct sound in Minneapolis. It's a bit more poppier than I would say Boston. When I think of Boston is more like jazz, and there's kind of like a
Hmm.
classic Berkeley sound in my eyes that kind of accompanies there. And then when you're on the West Coast, it's a lot more like surf rock. So every scene kind of has its own thing. New York is a bit more like rock, I guess, kind of punk, probably too. So they're definitely different in terms of like what shows are going to be like, who's going to come out. Something I think of even like, I guess too with Minneapolis, but I think of it in Los Angeles is it's like when you go to a show, it's a commitment because you're driving. It's the same thing in Minneapolis because it's like if it's the winter and it's cold, like you've made a commitment to go to this show, you're gonna go to it, and like it just takes a little bit more effort, I think, to get people there. Whereas New York, you never really know because it's like you have public transit and people aren't driving, so you're kind of just like, oh yeah, like, but there's also a million things to do here. So it's like it's very interesting to see like how things operate, and even like the DIY spaces that pop up. If it's like an apartment, it's a lot closer and cramped, and it's a living room or something like that. So it's a bit different, whereas Boston, you're almost always underground and in a basement.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking of when you said like Boston. Like my experience with Philly, that's pretty much, there's a few venues. A lot of the smaller venues are kind of, a lot of them are 21 plus, which is very unfortunate that like a lot of smaller artists, for lack of a better word, are kind of pushed into these shows where, younger fans aren't welcome. So it's either like that or basement shows. So is that kind of like how Boston is, or?
Austin's a lot like that too, because I remember when I was under 21, it was really difficult to find a space you could play. And Minneapolis, I feel like, was kind of like that too, where a lot of the venue spaces, as a 7th Street Entry is one that I know you can be under 21, have a show there. but a lot of the spaces are like bars that you can play at that are accessible. You can't, for the most part, play at 7th Street entry until you reach a certain level, kind of. Like, that's not like a starter out place for the most part. So it's a bummer because they don't have that gap currently, or I don't know a lot of people that know that there is like a gap there, like a DIY scene, whereas Boston like can fill that gap in with like the house show venues that are there, so people can, you know, when you're under 21 and even when you're over, you're still playing at those places. But it's a lot easier to get, I guess, a younger crowd in that isn't like, you know, confined to an age limit of 21 plus.
Yeah, that was something, quick side note, I that was, like, tough for me when, like, COVID hit because I had, like, turned 21, like, just a few months after, so it was like, I was looking forward to, like, I'm gonna go to all these shows at bars that I've, like, missed out on, and it's like, no shows whatsoever, so, yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and on that note, I was kinda wondering, I mean, I'm sure you've been performing, like, longer than, what you can find on, like, Songkick or just on the internet where it lists shows, but it seemed like in terms of, like, where you were able to get booked, you were kinda, like, moving up more or less, like, right before COVID hit. I don't know if that's completely accurate or not, but that was kind of what I was gathering and the impression that I got, and I'm wondering, like, obviously COVID hit every artist hard and completely destroyed touring. But what was that experience like for you, and how do you kind of prepare yourself to kind of bring that momentum back with shows coming back like after that?
Was really difficult when it hit. I think anyone in life kind of hit a point where you're like, there's not a like there's no point of me doing anything is what it kind of felt like. And
Yeah.
it definitely felt like that with music. I know that we had started working on the EP and originally we were like, okay, great, we can, you know, use this couple of months is what we thought it was gonna be. We're like, we'll use this couple of months to just like lay out what we want on the EP and like record things. And then I think it just got to this point where it was like we were doing, or I was doing like these live stream shows, and they were horrible because it's like you are just singing to like a laptop and you don't hear anyone clap. It's like really hard to get energy from it. And a big part of my music is the entertainment and performance part of it. Like that is a big part of my shows that I like to engage with the crowd and I like to like dance when I, you know, play and stuff. And it's like when I'm sitting on a bed, there's not really much I can do. And it's like I love, you know, my drummer and my bassist, and I love the musicians I play with. So it's really difficult to not have them there. And it almost feels like unfinished songs. So I'd say for a while it was really like I think we got to a point where we were like recording and trying things out with this like live stream thing, and then I was like insanely just depressed and like did not
Yeah.
want to continue doing things. And I remember like my bandmates being like, "Hey, remember those songs we were working on? Like, do you want to keep doing those?" And I just was like, "What is the point?" Like, I just was like really, really, really having a hard time with things. And then things started coming back, but it was really the DIY scene, I would say, was slower to come back because I think, at least in Boston, they're pretty conscious of the fact that it's like it's a basement and it's someone's
Yeah.
house. So it's like you're not only in someone's basement, you're using like their bathroom and their kitchen and you're hanging out with people. And it's like it just feels a lot more concentrated at times than venue spaces. So that kind of eliminated how people were spending their time and like where they wanted to go. So it was weird to get back into things. And then when we started our tour in the fall, it was like, I think Omicron was like hitting or something, it was one of the COVID spikes. And we're like, oh shit, like we have planned this tour. We've like moved it at least twice now. Like, we're gonna do our best. You know, these venues aren't closing down, so we're just gonna do our best to like get tested, make sure everyone is wearing a mask and people are being safe. And those shows were definitely weird too. Like, and even to this day, I'd say people, at least in New York, it's not as common that people will be masked up at shows and stuff, but it feels a lot better now than it did. And I think it just took a while to get back into the rhythm of feeling safe and feeling safe around the vaccine and everyone taking the precautions that they can to stay like safe and do what they can to not get sick and not get other people sick. So it was really weird. And I think there were also a lot of plans that we had too of like touring that just kind of they've gotten thrown off a couple of times where it's like we had a touring plan in the spring and it's like I got COVID and then was really weak and I was like, we're not going on tour. Like I can't do this. I'm not sleeping well. Like I'm recovering and everyone I think it's just about adjusting and like doing the best that we can. But it's really thrown things off too in terms of like even predicting people that are gonna come to shows. It's really interesting to see just like little things of like people are like, oh, like no, like I feel like people still are maybe kind of in a more like, oh, I don't know if it's worth it to go to a show. Like I kind of want to stay home and like I feel like people are more now keen to go to these DIY shows over a venue show because it's a little bit more like a social party and you have the music element to it. So it's definitely interesting to see the shift of things going on, like how COVID has even affected how people want to consume, when they want to consume, and like where they're getting their music from.
Yeah, I think at least for me, like shows is they're definitely still in a weird spot, and I guess I can kind of understand like I feel like with house shows and like in regards to COVID, I feel like there's just like a more inherent like communal aspect to house shows. I feel like to where like if they say masks are required, most people are probably going to keep them on. Whereas I know I went to I don't know how many shows where they said masks were required, and it was like a major venue, and that was not really enforced because kind of hard to. And yeah, it's I don't know.
Yeah, it's a weird time.
So wasn't was the entire EP that you have coming up, which we haven't even mentioned, I guess technically, Miss Girl World, out August 19th. It's your second EP, if I'm not wrong. Was that whole thing recorded during the pandemic, and what was that process like?
Yeah, so Miss Girl World was recorded during the pandemic. Basically, when we started that, I had like no equipment. I just wasn't. I'm trying to even think how we used to. I guess I was at school at Northeastern at the time. So when we did record, we were using like our school facilities to do it because they had like a studio space and we didn't have to get mics. So I had like nothing. And at the time, my bassist, James Duncan, who also produced, mixed, and mastered the EP, was working at Guitar Center and he was like, we're gonna get you a setup, dude. So he got me like a really nice microphone. We like went over things with interfaces. I had Logic and like he got it for me at a very, very good deal with the Guitar Center discount. So from there he was kind of like, okay, this is like, the best setup. And then I recorded things in like I think I recorded them at home first in Minneapolis. I took everything with me over like a winter break. I recorded it in like a lake house and it was like a closet in Pennsylvania. I recorded it like in my room in Boston and like pretty much how it went was I laid down the guitar and I laid down the vocals. And I think my bassist kind of came in and then my drummer came in, kind of how it went. So it's been very chaotic. We were planning on having this released and we recently redid all the guitar parts for it. So it's been like, this was finished for like a year and then we just redid all the guitar work for it. So it sounded different than it did a year ago when it was mixed and mastered, but I really I'm happy with how it is.
Okay. So yeah, then what was like how different did it sound? Because I'm wondering, like I was kind of comparing listening to the new one and your first one, Lashing Out, and I feel like it's kind of like a little more subdued and kind of melodic and not as like raw and like just kind of powerful, I guess, but it's still like has the same sort of like indie rock, but still like jangly pop sort of edge to it. And I'm just wondering like what the differences are between these two EPs, or maybe between the uh, version you had before you re-recorded the guitars, and like just generally how you would describe your sound.
Yeah, I guess kind of when I started out with that first EP, when people have like I've talked to people because I'm like, yeah, I don't really like the way that first EP sounds.
Hmm,
People are like, oh, it kind of sounds like polished. Like that's not how
hmm.
I when people talk to me, they're like, that's I would say even with this record, people are like, that is not how you sound live. Like it just has a different energy to it when it's live than when it's recorded that is I think for me is one of the most difficult things is when you're alone in your room replicating how it is going to sound with the energy of having people there and having a full band together playing it is so hard, and it's something that I am really working towards even for the next EP that we're going to have come out to be able to replicate that sound so it sounds more like what people hear. Um yeah, the first EP, there's rhythm guitar. A couple of the songs have lead guitar. That band had been assembled for like maybe 6 months at the time. I had just met my drummer, and I had a previous bassist that was on the record. And then now it's like I have this new bassist who James Duncan, who is the producer. He is the best. He's very very talented. And I have my drummer that I've known since the beginning. So I think we've just kind of understood each other's sound, and like they know more of what I want, and like it just aligns a lot better. So it's like Samuel, the drummer, has gotten like he just like knows the Maya Lucia sound of like what I want in terms of the drums, and like having a tasteful style that still kind of pushes the song but is able to also add like it's like melodic drumming almost. I guess is how I would just everyone in the band is melodic in their own way, and that it's very difficult to find people that are able to do that. So I would say like overall that's kind of what the sound is it's like it's leaning more into pop music. Obviously there's a couple of songs on the record that are pretty like heavy, and a lot of the stuff I think if you peel back the overall sound and you look at the lyrics, they're definitely heavier in general, just in terms of what they're talking about, but they're kind of disguised with that like jangly pop sound with a bit of rock that is going to come with anything that has a guitar, in my opinion. But yeah, I think we're kind of leaning into hoping to lean into new things and new like structures of writing songs and how we can pull each instrument out in different ways of creating melodies. And I think it's really interesting with this record because some of these songs were written so long ago. They were written around the time when Lashing Out came out and when
Hmm.
Lashing Out was made too. Like there's a lot of maybe like two or three songs on this record that are from that like time period or era. So it's I can hear and I can see the songwriting styles that I was really reliant on, and then I can see some of the songs that are showing a different direction that I would like to go in and I would like to play around with more rather than just having it be kind of like I would say Lashing Out is kind of like square, like in terms of like structures of songs, and there's nothing wrong with that, but even when you're a writer, like that gets kind of boring to be like, okay, it's going to be four verse lines and then two chorus lines and then four chorus lines. It's like no, we can do different structures, and it's like very dependent on, I guess, the sounds I've been exposed to, and even my band members, what they have been listening to, and what we kind of been listening to as a whole that fuses us. One thing I think that tends to be pretty common is like Wilco is really big for like all of us. That's like our great equalizer. Like we listen to a lot of different music. James was listening to like math rock and post punk, and it's like then Samuel's listening to country, and I'm listening to like pop music and Shakira, and like it's like just this, and then it's like Wilco. That's like the fusing line for all of us. So I think this record is really exciting because it's going to be taking us in a new direction, hopefully. And is kind of like a good foundation for things that I want to play around with more in the future in terms of styles and sounds and just a different way of writing and making music, hopefully.
Yeah. Um, so you talk about how the songwriting is like heavy and kind of, I think there's a lot of emotion that goes into your songwriting, and that combined with the first track on your Lashing Out EP is called Sad Girl, in parentheses, rest in peace, Movie Pass. And it just kind of like, not because it's lumped in with that to me, but this like trend for whatever reason to lump like female or female fronted indie rock and pop musicians into like this really like kind of just dumb umbrella of like sad girl music. And I don't want to go into a whole tangent on that and how it's like pretty unfair and not really that accurate. And I'm just wondering if like how you feel about that term, and um, just if you've had anyone compare you to that, or like just overall your experience as a woman making like emotionally charged music and the different reactions that elicits.
I think it's interesting to see, like, I'm always fascinated what people choose to compare me to a lot after they see me play. And I would say usually they kind of just pick a woman where they're like, "You sound like Liz Fair." And I'm like, "I don't sound like Liz." Like, I'm just like, "Where'd you get that from, dude?" Like, that's just so common. Like, they will just like pick a woman in rock music and be like, "You sound like this person." It's like, they're just women. Like, the only thing that we have in common is that we identify as like girls. Like, there's not, say what you will, and if you can draw me a good comparison, I'm always interested in hearing it. But it's very interesting to like, I guess, kind of be put in that where they're like, "Oh, this is a girl band making music," and like, I we had a joke on tour at one point, and it's in like currently in my Instagram bio, where now my bio says Miss Girl Fronted, and we were talking about like, someone must have been like, "Oh, it's a really good, like, we're looking for girl fronted bands," or like they just said something really funny where we're like, that's like they were calling it a genre. Where they're like, "I'm really into girl fronted music," and it's like, what the hell does that mean? Like, I what is that? What do you think that means? So it's like, it's really interesting, and I think "Sad Girl" Rip Movie Pass, it's funny that you, like, are using that as the example because that song was like a joke when I wrote it, like, it's playing into those, like, very, like, sad girl themes where it's like the whole song was a joke, like, it was not a serious song at all, so I always think that's really funny to play because it's like a melodrama song. It's really not serious. I was not gonna like. There was a time I think where I was just kind of like, there's another song that Chaptown USA that's kind of like that too, and there's actually one on this record too called Tobias where they're just like, they're not serious. Like they're not like, it's like the whole Miss Girl World EP. I think kind of goes through these different themes, and some of them, a lot of them, I will say, are melodramatic because I think when I am in my feelings, I'm very difficult to pull out into reality, and that's just how I am. But some of the songs themselves are just like, I like to throw those little nuggets in where it's like, yes, I am a person. Like I don't need to like make specifically sad music or like be in a certain bubble of a genre. Like it might be annoying to listen to at times on a record, but I kind of like having those in some of, at least in parts of my music where it's like not that serious.
Um, yeah, so you mentioned Wilco, and then you just said something that for some reason it just, I completely forgot about it. Oh yeah, you said it's like kind of hard to, I guess, like separate yourself or whatnot, but I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the exact phrasing, but it made me think of, I had this note about last year you were on a podcast called My Favorite Podcast, in which the main focus was on Sufjan Stevens and Carrie and Lowell being your favorite album to cry to. And you kind of talked about how that influenced your like ability to sort of process emotion. And you talked a little bit about how like that carries over into your songwriting, and I'm wondering like if you could expand on that anymore, and if there are any other albums that might rank atop a list of best albums to cry to for you.
Woo. Yeah, that was a very fun podcast episode to talk about. I love that album. It's really like nostalgic even to think about. Like I just like, oh, I think about like myself in high school and I don't remember if the first time I heard it, I used to go to this coffee shop a lot with my friends. It was like right around the corner from my house and like they used to play it a lot and like it just like was such a big soundtrack for me, and I think like that's kind of why I say a lot of the songs like have this hint of melodrama. Is like, for example, "Numb" or something. That song was written pretty quickly. Like if I remember, it took me like an hour maybe because I went
Hmm.
in a fight with someone, and it like I just was really feeling a lot of things and kind of like encapsulated, I guess, in that song where I just was feeling very frustrated and like later I think I'll go back and be like, you were not doing well. Like you needed to go back to therapy and like you needed to like that was like not healthy and like I can like now process a lot of the things and be like, just attach them to different things that have happened to me and why I think a certain way and like it's really interesting, I guess, to kind of have those memories sonically to be like, oh yeah, like I remember what was going through my head at that time. And I know the behavior I was exhibiting at that time, and it was not great for me and it was not great for others, but like I cannot, it like makes it more tangible in a way, I guess. And kind of like now I can think back and it kind of solidifies a point in time where maybe I wasn't at my best and I can be able to process that for the future. Um, so I guess kind of that's what I was leaning into with that. But that album, I remember like before that podcast, I was like, I'm gonna go look up a bunch of things because there's always little nuggets that you learn. And like I remember, I think it's in the Wikipedia article about this album, but Sufjan was talking about one of the songs on the album, and he's like, yeah, the producer like locked me in the room because I wouldn't finish the song and I was like crying and like he had just lost his mom who he had a bunch of like childhood trauma with and like he was trying to like just like really was unwell and was like that's like what came out and I think that album you can like I just get like chills even thinking about it but you can like really feel a lot of the pain that he's going through with that situation itself or just the pain in the vocal lines. It's so beautiful and it's a pretty like minimal album that has a lot of these beautiful production nuggets that are like it's not like a guitar solo ripping through. It's like very subtle synth sounds and things like that. And I think that's something that James, my producer and bassist, and like second mastermind really does a lot. Like he does a very good job doing that in his production. I really like that. And we were actually talking about that recently because he was like, "Oh, I like want to show you like the session of Spinelli, one of the songs that's on the EP." And we like went through, and he's like, "Look, you can hear this and see this, and I took this from this, and I reversed this, and like you can't really hear it, but if you like are listening intentionally, you can." So I think that's something that's really beautiful about his work that I would draw a parallel to with Sufjan's work on that like EP is like or that album is that like it's things that it's production you don't notice and that's the most beautiful part about it is that unless you're consciously like looking for something you're it's like there and that's what you want something that's not going to be like what the fuck is that like what was that sound you want it to like fit into the sonic landscape so yeah I think that that is a really beautiful album I guess in terms of like oh, I'm so bad when people are like, "What are your favorite albums?" I'm like, "Dude, when people don't ask me this, I like I got them. I got like I have everything." But I was on the train today recently and I was listening to Depression Cherry by Beach
Mm.
House Classic, which is also I literally think they might either be from the same year, or at least that was when I was in high school, and that was like such a big album to like be upset to and like have your teenage angst like felt to. So I like that is a very good one to cry to, I would say as well.
Yeah, that is a really good album. I quick like side note about that. I think have you ever seen I don't know if every like copy of it is like this, but I know it the like it's
The
like felt
about it. Yeah.
so cool. I remember I'm involved in college radio And I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, what is this? And I just thought that was
Yeah,
so cool.
yeah,
Um,
it's very cool.
but I got like one more thing left to talk about, and we can move away from crying and being sad and melodramatic. Um, I like to look through artists like Twitter and just like kind of see, just how they interact with that. And I
That's
saw I saw a tweet that said, "I can't wait to be famous, so my old tweets resurface and get the fame they deserve." So that is like the perfect opportunity for me to just ask you if you have any more thoughts, or even just to highlight some of your tweets that were my favorites that I was able to find. Ugh. Um, so in
I want
February,
to hear what your favorites are. That's so like, when was that tweet made? Can you tell me what year that was?
it was April 24th, 2019.
Yeah. That's really funny. When I made that tweet, I was living at the time in Orange, California, and for
Hmm.
some reason, I have like a couple tweets where I feel like I've said this or something along the line of it, but like whenever I go to California and I'm like with that specific friend group that all lives there, I like my brain just kind of goes to a different place. I like have it's like this like opening and I just like tweet really insane things that I feel like other times I'm not tweeting. And it happens even like I have a friend, Giovanna, who moved here and they like when I'm with them, I think I take a lot of like they have a very particular Twitter voice, and I think when it's like I'm with them and I'm with a couple other friends, we just like have these really insane moments of like Twitter rushes, which I have not had in a while. But when I was like at that peaceful like opening spot, they just kind of like all come out and they're very yeah, they're special. I'm trying to think if I've had a good one that I was like really proud of recently. I have no idea. I've been really bad about Twitter recently. Um, but yeah, I would love to hear what some of your favorites are from your digging.
All right, I think I've got like six of them right here. There was definitely some others I did screenshot, but I didn't want to just like read a bunch. I feel like there was like multiple about like raccoons that I thought were pretty funny. I
Oh my
did leave those
gosh,
off, but
yeah.
if you have any raccoon stories, I'd also love to hear those. But yeah.
Yeah, well, my apartment, the past apartment that I lived in Boston before I moved, um, we had like a raccoon issue and it was
Hmm.
really weird. They were just like all in the neighborhood and they were very freaky because they were huge. And they kind of would like just like make I've never heard a raccoon make noise and they're very it's very scary to hear them make like their summoning noise, like they're like summoning Satan and they all do it together, but you can't like see them or you'll like see them just doing things. But I had like I had I was going outside to go check for something and there was a raccoon just on my porch and it was huge and it was like it was so freaky and like I think that is probably that tweet or like I don't know, man. I think there was another time too where I was like, when I lived in California for a little bit, there were a lot of raccoons in the neighborhood and like possums, and they're just kind of like freaky because they're like oddly large and like but move really weird. Those are kind of my stories.
All right. So moving on to the tweets, we have, I think this might actually be the only one of the six I have that's from this year. It's from February. It's the Beatles totally would have jeweled. And you
Oh
also
yeah,
replied, who would have the mango pod?
yeah.
Did you ever decide what your answer to who would have the mango pod would be?
I think it's a Ringo thing. I think Ringo and I don't see John. I think John would be like having the tobacco one. I think Paul would probably be like a classic mint person. I don't remember any of the other flavors that there used to be. But if there was a heinous one, I also think John would have that. But Ringo, I think, would have a fun mango one where you're like, yeah.
Okay. The next one. I don't. I conspiracy theory that Bill Clinton and Blake Shelton are the same person.
When was that one made?
That was in May of 2019. Do you remember that thought process at all? Or
No, I have no idea. They do look exactly the same though. Like that's I believe that conspiracy theory. Look literally the same in my mind and they sound the same in my mind too.
this next one kind of I can kind of relate to because I'm kind of terrified of dolls, honestly. This is also from 2019. Just made eye contact with the American Girl doll in my childhood closet, and she called me a bitch. Some relationships will never mend.
Uh my American Girl dolls in that closet are like love them because they, have like sentimental value to them. But their eyes are just always like. And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh," "I'm so sorry about when I tried to, like, comb your hair and you have knots and, like, you're, like, falling out of the chair you've been in for, like, 5 years and are, like there's a horse on top of you." Like, they're just, like, kind of in sad positions, and sometimes I'm like I think one day there's, like, a in my childhood closet, I think there's like a crib situation that they used to have, and I think one day I just picked them up and put them on it so their eyes would close because I was like, I don't think you need to be awake anymore. Like, let's take some rest, girls.
This one, I don't know if what additional comments could be made, but it's from 2020. Unless you're a bee with a fat, juicy ass, GTFO, my garden.
I had started a garden like most people during quarantine, and we had a really huge, like, I've never seen a bee this big, but I just remember it being really big. And we were like, that's the winner, that's gonna make the garden grow. Like, unless, and there were like, that garden was chaotic too because it was in Boston. There was a rat living under the porch at the time too. And there were these birds that we had like grown kale and we had grown a beautiful, it was like finally the kale had sprouted and we were like, yes, now we have kale. And the birds all came the
Oh.
next day, eat all of the kale. And I was like, oh my God, what did that? No, it was the bird. So I was like, if you're not a bee, I don't want you in my garden. I don't like any of the other animals that come into my garden. They freak me out.
Well, good thing it wasn't the rat, because then I'd be a little bit hesitant to ask this next question because this tweet is rat related. 2019, it's a picture of Remy from Ratatouille, and it says the original short king.
Yes. I was really having 2019 was a good year for Maya Lucia Twitter. I was like, that was my levitating year of like brain empty, no thoughts, but just Twitter thoughts.
All right, this is the last one, and there's probably got to be some interesting story behind it because the more I think about it, I'm just like trying to imagine what could have been said. But 2021, you said I tried to implement Disney Channel dialogue into my life as a child, and it got me in so much trouble, like soap in the mouth trouble. And I'm having a hard time imagining like what was said on Disney Channel that could be like so bad for
Dude,
soap in
they're
the mouth.
all really sassy to their they're
Yeah.
all really sassy to their
Okay.
parents, and I would say I grew up in a pretty like zero tolerance, no sass, like
Yeah.
pretty strict household to be quite honest with you. Like my parents were like no nonsense. Like they were like you're good kids. And so I just remember like really implementing stuff of being like, oh my God, I used to always be like, my bad, like from like, oh my bad. And they would be like, my mom would be like, my bad. Like, yeah, it is your bad. And I would be like, yeah, my bad. Like she would be like, that would make her so bad. She'd be like, it is your bad. Like, that's not what you're supposed to say. Like, that's so stupid. So she would get really mad. Like Lizzie McGuire, I think, just had like a huge attitude, and I was that show. So I was like, I got banned from like a couple shows, and I remember my mom being like, "We will not let you watch television if you keep talking like this." And me and my sibling would be like, "No, like please let us watch." So Yeah, we did not have cable growing up, but we had Disney Channel for some reason. So
Hmm.
that's kind of where I got most of my sass. And then when I would go visit like my cousins or my friends, we would be watching Nickelodeon, and that is like, I would say that's a pretty sassy channel. Like the kids are kind of like lawless, and my parents are like, no, there's law. Like in our house, that's not what we do. So yeah, that was I got in trouble for that a lot.
All right. Yeah, that I can see that. That's all the tweets I had, and all the questions I had. Do you have anything else you want to talk about real quick, or anything on your mind?
Anything on my mind? I love filling. That's something on my mind. We played a show like a couple weeks ago at this DIY place called the Palace. So anyone from Philly, in Philly, visiting Philly, go check them out. They're the sweetest, best place. But yeah, EP comes out on the 19th of August. We're really excited and hope to be doing more touring and have more music out either this fall or next spring.
Nice. Okay, well, all right. You heard it. EP August 19th. Check it out. Bandcamp, Spotify, I assume Apple Music, and pretty much anywhere else you can listen to music. Thank you so much for getting on the Zoom call, and best of luck with the release, and best of luck not running into any more raccoons. Um,
Thank you.
yep. All right. Thank you again. Take care. Bye.